In 1945, Europe lay in ruins, millions displaced. Amid the chaos, one man vanished from the map, Klaus Barbie, the butcher of Lyon. Responsible for torture, deportations and executions, his name appeared on every list of wanted war criminals, yet no one stopped him. While the courts tried the Reich's top officials, Barbie received protection. False documents, official visas, and support from priests and allied agents paved his way. Under a new identity, he crossed Europe via clandestine routes that would later be known as the RatLines, secret corridors that transported thousands of Nazis to South America. How did a torturer manage to escape under the noses of his pursuers? What price did the world pay for turning an executioner into an ally for 40 years? How many more crimes would he commit before anyone dared to stop him? The Refuge in the Shadows, Bolivia, as sanctuary for the butcher of Lyon. In April 1951, a train from Buenos Aires arrived in La Paz after crossing the Andes. Among the passengers was a German family carrying international Red Cross passports under the names Klaus Altmann, Regine Wilhelms Altmann, and their 2 children. No official suspected that the man was Klaus Barbie, former head of the Gestapo in Lyon. His arrival was the result of an operation organized by the United States Counterintelligence Corps with support from ecclesiastical intermediaries and diplomatic officials. By the end of 1950, France had requested his extradition. For Washington, the case threatened to expose the cooperation between Barbie and the CIC during the post-war period. Croatian priest Krunoslav Draganovic, a RatLines operator, was tasked with facilitating his escape. With the backing of Bishop Alois Hudal, Red Cross identity certificates and a Bolivian visa were issued in Genoa, stamped March 14, 1951. On March 23, the family would board the ship Corrientes bound for South America. When the CIC confirmed the departure, the case was closed. The sensitive asset had been successfully relocated. Bolivia offered the perfect setting to remain invisible. The country was undergoing a chronic political crisis and lacked effective immigration controls. In Cochabamba, Croatian priest Stjepan Osvaldi Toth, also a war refugee, acted as the local contact. The Altmans spent their first months in the Yungas before moving to La Paz. The environment allowed them to keep a low profile while maintaining connections with other European immigrants without attracting attention. The 1952 revolution, led by Victor Paz Estenssoro's revolutionary nationalist movement, reshaped Bolivia's political landscape. The new government encouraged the arrival of foreign specialists to drive economic modernization. Altmann legalized his residency and, in 1957, obtained Bolivian citizenship. His documentation, Red Cross passport and ecclesiastical recommendation, was accepted without objection. Official records listed him as a civil engineer born in Kronstadt with no military background. The nationalization of mines and agrarian reform created demand for experts in logistics and foreign trade. Altmann established a small company exporting cinchona bark to European laboratories, including Boehringer Ingelheim. His business ties with West Germany provided credibility and a stable economic position. His profile matched the image of the hard-working European immigrant the MNR sought to promote. The German community in Bolivia maintained an active social network of clubs and associations. The German Club of La Paz became his main point of integration. Regine managed the library while he attended business meetings. His Spanish was limited, but his efficiency earned him respect. Contemporary publications listed him as a merchant and transporter, with no reference to his European past. Between 1955 and 1960, Altmann expanded his network into military and political spheres. His anti-Marxist stance brought him close to officials in the Ministry of the Interior and officers of the armed forces. Later sources from the Bundesnachrichtendienst indicate he collaborated as an informant under the codename Adler, sending reports on unions and leftist movements in Bolivia and the Southern Cone. This connection ensured regular income and diplomatic protection. Connections with other European refugees remained constant. Altmann kept in contact with Walter Rauff in Chile, Hans Rudel as a regional military advisor, and Friedrich Schwend in Peru. Commercial exchanges included both legal operations and arms smuggling. Bolivian archives list him as a partner in transport companies and a government supplier. His name circulated in business and ministerial circles as a synonym for efficiency. During the decade, his public image solidified as that of a model immigrant. The MNR viewed him as a useful technician, the German embassy as a pragmatic liaison, and the military as a reliable ally. In La Paz, he participated in Catholic associations and charitable committees. His wife organized cultural activities and maintained connections with influential families. Rumors about his true identity never went beyond isolated comments that no one investigated. By the mid-1960s, Klaus Altmann had secured a comfortable position within Bolivian society. His company operated trade routes, his contacts in the Ministry of the Interior remained active, and his name appeared in official records without suspicion. The country, however, was entering a new phase of political turbulence. Fissures within the MNR, social conflicts, and a growing fear of communism were shifting the balance of power. In this climate, Altmann continued to move between businessmen and officers, adjusting his alliances to the changing circumstances. The anonymous German businessman was beginning to occupy a space close to the core of Bolivian power. Advisor to power, the war criminal who designed a nation's intelligence. At the beginning of the 1960s, Bolivia was undergoing political wear and tear. The revolutionary nationalist movement, in power since 1952, had fractured into military and civilian factions. Social reforms were losing momentum, and labor conflicts were escalating. In this scenario, René Barrientos Ortuño emerged, a United States-trained Air Force pilot, charismatic and of Quechua origin. His ability to speak the language of the peasants and his anti-communist rhetoric made him a natural ally of the army and of Washington. Within the MNR, Barrientos was appointed Air Force commander and later vice president, consolidating his influence among the younger officers. Klaus Altmann met him during this period at social gatherings and business meetings in La Paz. They shared contacts within the Ministry of the Interior and a pragmatic vision of order. Control had to come before negotiation. Altmann offered technical expertise in logistics and communications. Barrientos saw in him a foreign collaborator with experience and discretion. From this initial relationship, direct cooperation would emerge over the years. On November 4, 1964, army units surrounded the Palacio Quemado. Barrientos, together with General Alfredo Ovando Candia, deposed President Victor Paz Estenssoro. The coup restored political power to the armed forces, lost after the 1952 revolution. Barrientos assumed the provisional presidency with the support of the U.S. diplomatic corps and local business elites. His priority was to stabilize the country through a modern intelligence structure and a campaign to legitimize his administration before the White House. During the first months, Altmann increased his activity within the circles of power. Colonels Luis Rolón Anaya and Antonio Vargas Salinas, in charge of the Ministry of the Interior, brought him on as an informal advisor on counterinsurgency and security matters. At the Hotel Crillon in La Paz, the venue for meetings between military officers and diplomats, he participated in discussions on internal surveillance and information management. His command of German, technical background and contacts with the Bundesnachrichtendienst gave him a useful position. The regime sought direct cooperation with the CIA, which following the Cuban Revolution had expanded its presence in Latin America. Altmann, identified as an anti-communist and former counterintelligence corps collaborator, functioned as an unofficial intermediary. He attended planning meetings, reviewed reports on unions and peasant movements, and advised on the creation of a national intelligence service. His role was undocumented, but well known to senior commanders. In 1966, the arrival of Ernesto Che Guevara's guerrilla in Yancahuazú tested the new government. Barrientos ordered the formation of joint intelligence units with U.S. advisory support. Altmann collaborated as a technical advisor in information analysis, training and tracking. Contemporary testimonies place him in meetings in Cochabamba and Santa Cruz, alongside Bolivian officers and U.S. embassy observers. His knowledge of interrogation tactics and clandestine networks gave him influence within the armed forces. During the campaign, he acted as a silent consultant, providing the Ministry of the Interior with intelligence on insurgent movements. According to BND archives, he continued operating under the codename Adler, sending reports on leftist groups and Che Guevara's international contacts. His dual status as businessman and security advisor gave him mobility and cover. At the same time, his company, Transmarítima Boliviana, officially engaged in transport and foreign trade, served as a front for logistical operations and arms imports. The company maintained links with European intermediaries and other Reich refugees settled in South America. The combination of business and intelligence work made Altmann a functional asset of the new state. The Barrientos government, backed by Washington, turned counterinsurgency into structural policy. With US instructors, Bolivia modernized its interrogation methods and created national registries of militants. Altmann participated in drafting internal security manuals and organizing networks of informants linking La Paz, Santa Cruz, and Cochabamba. Colonels Rolón Anaya and Vargas Salinas directed this system, integrating civilian, military, and police control. The capture and execution of Che Guevara in October 1967 consolidated Barrientos's power and strengthened ties with the United States. In the following months, Altmann moved freely among government offices and embassies. His dual role as businessman and advisor ensured protection and prestige. BND reports highlighted his efficiency and his constructive attitude in the defense of the West. No Bolivian authority questioned his past or his growing influence. By the end of 1967, Altmann had moved from a tolerated refugee to a central collaborator within Bolivia's security apparatus. His expertise, international network, and company positioned him to expand operations beyond military advisory work. The country was entering a new cycle of economic and political alliances. Under the facade of Transmarítima, a transport and smuggling system began to take shape, connecting him with regional power networks. Ships, weapons, and Nazis, the empire of Klaus Altmann. In 1967, Klaus Altmann founded Transmarítima Boliviana, a shipping company based in La Paz. The project was paradoxical. Bolivia had no access to the sea since the War of the Pacific in 1879, yet President René Barrientos's nationalism turned the idea into a symbol of sovereignty. Altmann, presented as a naval engineer, proposed a Bolivian merchant fleet operating from foreign ports. Barrientos approved the initiative, and the state acquired the majority of shares. The remainder went to private investors, including Altmann himself and American William Ayers, owner of a shipping company in New Orleans. The board of directors included senior military officers and the Army's head of intelligence. Gaston Velasco Carrasco, businessman and promoter of maritime nationalism, served as company president. Barrientos himself appointed Altmann as general director. The company was presented as a strategic and patriotic venture. In practice, it became a tool for financial and logistical operations linked to the international arms trade. Transmarítima registered 17 vessels flying the Bolivian flag, making stops in Valparaiso, Antwerp, Hamburg, and Cologne. Its activities included exporting minerals and timber and importing grains, machinery, and weaponry. Altmann obtained a diplomatic passport and used it to travel between Europe and the Americas. He visited West Germany, Spain, France, the United States, Brazil, and Chile. In Madrid, he met with Otto Skorzeny, former SS officer coordinating industrial networks from François Spain. In Hamburg, he appointed his son Klaus Georg as a commercial agent. The shipping company appeared as a state economic project, but functioned as a cover for smuggling operations. The business channeled operations for European companies Merex AG and Steyr Daimler Puch, both specializing in military equipment. Altmann acted as an intermediary alongside Hans Rudel, a former Luftwaffe pilot based in Paraguay, and Friedrich Schwend, an SS financial operator in Peru. Together with Wilhelm Sassen, a Dutch journalist connected to South American regimes, they formed an informal network known as La Estrella. This group of ex-Nazis served as intermediaries between European industries, Latin American governments, and Western intelligence services. BND and CIA archives confirm that Transmarítima was used to transport weapons from Hamburg and Genoa to Arica, Callao, and Santa Cruz. Among the most documented operations was the shipment of cuirassier tanks, armored vehicles, and ammunition, carried out under official contracts that concealed personal commissions. Payments were made through encrypted accounts in Hamburg and San Francisco. The profits financed political activities and anti-communist networks in the region. In 1968, a covert transaction diverted a shipment of arms intended for Bolivia that ended up in Israel. The transport took place through Belgian and Spanish ports in 3 stages. Altmann coordinated the operation alongside Schwend, both BND informants. The scandal erupted in 1970 with the assassination of 2 Bolivian journalists investigating arms smuggling. On February 17th, Jaime Otero Calderón, director of the newspaper Hoy, was found dead in his home. A few weeks later, a bomb killed Alfredo Alexander Jordan, owner of Ultima Hora. Both had obtained documents implicating officials from the Ministry of the Interior and Transmarítima's management. Investigations pointed to a group of agents under the supervision of Luis Arce Gomez, then aide to General Alfredo Ovando Candia. Testimony from businessman Alvaro de Castro identified Altmann as the coordinator of the smuggling operations that prompted the murders. None of those responsible were prosecuted. After these events and the fall of the Barrientos regime, he died in a plane crash in 1969, the company began to decline. During General Ovando's government, Transmarítima continued operating with accumulated debts and financial losses. Even so, Altmann retained his diplomatic passport and maintained contacts with European embassies. In 1970, with the rise of General Juan José Torres and a political shift to the left, his position became vulnerable. In coordination with Friedrich Schwend, he moved to Lima, where he attempted to replicate his transport and arms trading operations. The partnership with Schwend in Peru led to fraudulent operations that drew police attention. In June 1973, a raid on Schwend's house uncovered documents related to the network of ex-Nazis active in South America. Among the findings were Transmarítima records and correspondence addressed to Altmann in La Paz. The Peruvian press publicized the case, linking both men to arms transactions and the surveillance of political exiles. The episode damaged the reputation of Barrientos's former allies and exposed the international connections of the smuggling network. In Bolivia, the rise of Colonel Hugo Banzer Suarez in 1971 restored a favorable environment for Altmann, but the shipping company was already bankrupt. Transmarítima was liquidated in 1972 with significant debts and suspicions of corruption. By that time, the La Estrella network had diversified its activities toward financing right-wing movements and cooperating with Southern Cone intelligence services. Altmann, once again a refugee under the protection of military contacts, maintained his connections with the BND and former Reich collaborators. The fall of Transmarítima did not mark his retirement. The company had established an economic and political infrastructure that would endure in the following years. His smuggling network, alliances with Bolivian military officers, and relations with European businessmen laid the foundations of a power system combining trafficking, repression, and parallel diplomacy. The 1970s set the stage for a phase in which intelligence, crime, and government would merge under a single purpose, defending the anti-communist order in South America, Condor, narco-state, and total power. On August 21, 1971, Colonel Hugo Banzer Suarez seized power in Bolivia through a military coup that left dozens dead in La Paz. Banzer, a career officer and former minister under Barrientos, embodied the model of a Southern Cone military dictator, anti-communist, nationalist, and closely tied to Washington. For Klaus Altmann, the army's return to power also meant a return to security. After the instability of the Torres period and his time in Lima, where the press had begun tracing his past, he returned to Bolivia under the protection of the new regime. From 1971 onward, Altmann resumed his role as advisor to Army Intelligence Department 4. In this environment of absolute control, he participated in drafting counter-subversion manuals and coordinating with foreign military attachés. Banzer's dictatorship, which would last until 1978, consolidated a repressive apparatus supported by cooperation with the United States and a regional intelligence network that would soon integrate into Operation Condor. Operation Condor formalized coordination among the dictatorships of Chile, Argentina, Paraguay, Uruguay, Brazil, and Bolivia. Its goal was to eliminate political opposition both inside and outside their borders. Altmann acted as an informal liaison within this system, transmitting information on exiles and militants. His Gestapo background and experience with the counterintelligence corps gave him strategic value. The same techniques used in Europe during the occupation, tracking, torture, and disappearance, were now applied under the guise of national security. During the Banzer regime, Altmann kept his logistical network fully active. He coordinated trade and transport operations that served as a cover for arms trafficking. He collaborated with Friedrich Schwend in Lima and Hans Rudel in Paraguay. Through accounts in Panama and Hamburg, he moved funds and commissions. He also operated as an intermediary for Merex AG, a supplier of European military equipment, and as an informant for the Bundesnachrichtendienst, identified in the archives as Agent V4-3118. Money and contacts linked him to a new axis of power: narcotics. In Santa Cruz, he established a relationship with Roberto Suarez Gomez, a businessman who would soon be known as the Cocaine King. The old Transmarítima transport routes were used to export coca paste and cocaine to Panama and Mexico. The rise of Colonel Luis Arce Gomez, Altmann's ally, cemented this convergence between military intelligence and illicit business. Arce viewed him as a model of efficiency and adopted many of his methods. In 1973, when France requested the extradition of Klaus Barbie, Banzer refused, citing the absence of a bilateral treaty. The decision confirmed the official protection enjoyed by the German. Altmann was part of the system, advising, managing contracts and training officers in interrogation techniques adapted from the School of the Americas manuals. Over the years, Banzer's power began to erode. Mining strikes, international denunciations, and diplomatic pressure from Washington under the Carter administration forced the regime to yield. In 1978, Banzer left power. Altmann sensed the shift and began supporting new military actors. Alongside Arce Gomez and Álvaro de Castro, he took part in preparations for the coup that would bring General Luis García Meza to power in July 1980. The coup, financed by Roberto Suarez and executed with support from former Argentine and Chilean military personnel, inaugurated one of the country's most violent periods. Altmann, appointed advisor to the Ministry of the Interior under Arce Gomez, coordinated intelligence operations and liaison with foreign services. The Interior Security Brigade, organized under his supervision, carried out kidnappings, interrogations, and executions of opponents. UN reports and subsequent investigations by Peter McFarren document his involvement in torture sessions in La Paz. The methods were precise and cold: isolation, electric shocks, and mock executions. Repression was combined with protection of cocaine trafficking. Bolivia became a narco-state where politics, crime, and ideology were intertwined. During the García Meza regime, Altmann also promoted the creation of a paramilitary group known as Los Novios de la Muerte, composed of Bolivian, Argentine, and European mercenaries. Its dual purpose was to act as an internal shock force and ensure the secure transit of drug shipments abroad. The group maintained links with anti-communist networks in Central America, where some members participated in training militias that would combat the Sandinista revolution. The García Meza dictatorship lasted just over a year. In August 1981, international isolation and DEA reports on the financing of the coup precipitated its fall. The country was exhausted. Interior Ministry archives, reviewed after the return of democracy in 1982, revealed documents directly linking Klaus Altmann to intelligence operations, arms trafficking, and narcotics. The name Klaus Barbie reappeared in the reports. The protection network that had shielded him since 1951 was beginning to crumble. Yet he still retained allies within the army and hoped to withstand the political change. The Woman Who Hunted the Butcher: How Klaus Barbie Fell. In the early 1970s, in a Europe still processing the crimes of Nazism, a forgotten name resurfaced in the archives. In 1971, German activist Beate Klarsfeld was reviewing files at Munich's Ministry of Justice when she found a reference to a German businessman living in Bolivia, Klaus Altmann. The details matched the identity of Klaus Barbie, former Gestapo chief in Lyon. Beate and her husband, Serge Klarsfeld, then launched an investigation that would take them to South America and for more than a decade expose the networks of impunity protecting Nazi criminals on the continent. In Lima, witness Herbert John, linked to financial operator Friedrich Schwend, confirmed the suspicion. He stated he had dealt with Altmann and recognized in a photograph the same man who had directed repression in Lyon. On January 19, 1972, the newspaper L'Aurore published the proof. Anthropometric images demonstrated that Klaus Altmann and Klaus Barbie were the same person. The news spread quickly. Europe once again turned its attention to South America, and Bolivia came under international scrutiny. Beate and Serge Klarsfeld had become leading figures in the pursuit of war criminals. She, a post-war German, he, a French Jew whose father died in Auschwitz. Their struggle combined investigation, activism, and diplomatic pressure. In 1972, Beate traveled to Bolivia, accompanied by journalists and Holocaust survivors. She delivered to Immigration Minister Rodolfo Greminger a dossier containing photographic evidence and expert reports from German prosecutor Manfred Ludolf. The Hugo Banzer Suarez regime responded with harassment and ultimately deported her. Back in Europe, Beate declared, "To pursue a Nazi in La Paz is also to confront the fascism of the present." Weeks later, she returned accompanied by Itta Hallonbrenner, a survivor from Lyon. Both chained themselves in front of the Transmarítima offices in La Paz, holding a sign demanding justice. Images of the protests circulated worldwide and forced a diplomatic response. French President Georges Pompidou formally requested Barbie's extradition. Banzer refused, citing the sovereignty of Bolivian justice. In December 1973, the Supreme Court ruled that Altmann was a naturalized citizen and therefore non-extraditable. Barbie remained protected by the law and his contacts. The refusal sparked international outrage. The Klarsfelds published Le Dossier Barbie, denouncing the complicity between European and Latin American governments. Altmann reinforced his security. He survived 2 assassination attempts in 1974, but continued operating in arms trafficking and advising networks within Operation Condor. For the Southern Cone dictatorships, he remained a valuable asset. His intelligence experience made him indispensable. In Europe, the Klarsfelds turned memory into action. They founded the Association of Sons and Daughters of Jewish Deportees of France and published the Memorial of the Jews Deported from France, listing 75,000 victims. In 1978, they created the Klarsfeld Foundation, dedicated to documenting the Holocaust and supporting judicial cases. The international context was beginning to shift. The Cold War was waning, and human rights movements were gaining political traction. In 1982, under François Mitterrand, France reopened the case. The Klarsfelds presented new evidence classifying Barbie's crimes as crimes against humanity, imprescriptible. Paris again requested his extradition from Bolivia. That same year, the fall of Garcia Meza's dictatorship and the democratic return with Hernán Sáenz Zuazo created an unprecedented opportunity. The protection network that had shielded Barbie for 3 decades began to collapse. Many of his military allies had lost power or were in exile. Bolivian media published intelligence leaks and headlines hinting at his capture. Diplomatic pressure was reinforced by DEA and Italian police reports on the operations of Los Novios de la Muerte, the paramilitary group linked to Barbie. His health was also declining. He suffered chronic ailments and had lost his wife and son within a year. In 1983, the Sáenz Zuazo government decided to act. Interior Minister Gustavo Sánchez Salazar, with support from French Ambassador Régis Debray, designed a discreet operation. To avoid legal conflict, they opted for expulsion on grounds of immigration irregularities. On February 5th, Bolivian agents entered his Cochabamba residence and arrested him without resistance. Hours later, a military plane took off for Cayenne, with Lyon as the final destination. During the flight, Barbie remained silent. He believed he was being transferred to Germany. Only upon hearing French did he realize his true destination. On February 8th, he landed in Lyon and was taken to Montluc prison. The pursuit initiated by the Klarsfelds 2 decades earlier culminated in the fall of the Butcher of Lyon. How Klaus Barbie died in the prison. He himself ran. Montluc prison in Lyon had been the Gestapo's main detention center during the Nazi occupation. Between 1943 and 1944, Klaus Barbie directed the repression against the French resistance there. 40 years later, on February 8, 1983, he entered the same building as a prisoner. The decision by Justice Minister Robert Badinter to confine him at Montluc was deliberate. The executioner was returning to the site of his crimes. During the first months, he remained in isolation. Authorities feared attacks or escapes organized by neo-Nazi groups. His cell was minimal: a bed, a table, and a sink. French media followed every detail, oscillating between fascination and revulsion. For survivors, his capture was an opportunity to close a chapter. For François Mitterrand's government, It posed a legal and moral challenge. They had to try a crime committed 40 years earlier without turning the trial into a political spectacle. Judge Christian Riss oversaw the investigation. The main obstacle was legal: war crimes prescribed after 20 years, but crimes against humanity were imprescriptible under Nuremberg law. The challenge was to demonstrate that Barbie had not only committed acts of war, but had carried out systematic persecutions of civilians based on racial or religious motives. Riss gathered documents, telegrams, signed orders, and testimonies proving his direct role in the deportation of Jews and the torture of resistance members. The case of the Izieu children's home became the focal point of the trial. On April 6, 1944, 44 Jewish children and 7 adults were arrested on Barbie's orders, deported to Auschwitz, and murdered. The original telex reporting with military precision the capture of 44 Jewish children became irrefutable proof of his responsibility. This document, found in German archives, sealed the indictment: crimes against humanity. Barbie remained silent. His lawyer, Jacques Vergès, adopted the so-called rupture strategy, turning the trial into an indictment against France. He argued that the French state had no moral authority while remaining silent about its own colonial massacres in Algeria and Indochina. He did not deny the facts but sought to relativize them. The court rejected this line of defense, reaffirming that the trial judged an individual, not a nation. On May 11, 1987, the trial began at the Palais de Justice in Lyon. 800 journalists covered the proceedings. Barbie, 73 years old, appeared thin, in a dark suit and glasses. He attended impassively, almost motionless. The courtroom was filled with survivors and relatives of victims. Among the witnesses, Lise Lesèvre recounted the torture she endured at Montluc. Simone Lagrange, arrested at 13, described how Barbie beat her for hours, and Sabine Zlatin, founder of the Izieu Children's Home, spoke of the emptiness she felt returning and finding the children gone. Their voices reconstructed what time had not erased. Vergès attempted to sow doubt, questioning memories and presenting documents on France's colonial crimes. The court president, André Serdini, dismissed these maneuvers. Riss responded with signed documents and telegrams proving that Barbie not only knew of the operations, but had ordered them. The contrast between the accused's coldness and the witness's emotion defined the hearings. Each testimony was a fragment of collective memory. On July 4, 1987, after 6 weeks of trial, the jury found him guilty of crimes against humanity and sentenced him to life imprisonment. The verdict detailed his role in the deportation of more than 700 people and in the execution of resistance members. Barbie listened to the sentence without expression. His appeal was rejected months later. France closed one of the darkest chapters of its judicial history. Following the conviction, Barbie was transferred to Saint-Joseph prison, also in Lyon. His health declined rapidly: prostate cancer, heart problems, and leukemia. He spent most of his time in the infirmary. Only his daughter, Ute Maria, who occasionally traveled from Austria, visited him. In the few interviews he granted, he insisted on his innocence and justified his Gestapo career as a fight against Bolshevism. He never showed remorse. In 1990, a French documentary team filmed his final days. The footage shows an aged man with a vacant gaze, speaking in a soft voice in German. He denied remembering the details of Izieu, though he admitted signing the orders. He claimed to be following instructions. His carefully selective memory was his last defense. On September 25, 1991, he died at 77. His body was cremated in secret to prevent tributes from neo-Nazi groups. The ashes were dispersed without ceremony. Klaus Barbie's death closed a legal process, but not the questions it left behind. For 4 decades, he had been protected by governments, intelligence services, and dictatorships that valued his utility over justice. His story revealed the continuity between Nazism and the logic of the Cold War. The RatLines, the CIC, the BND, and the South American dictatorships had all been links in the same chain of impunity. The 1987 trial was belated, but symbolically restorative. It demonstrated that no crime against humanity can go unpunished. His case set a precedent in international law. It inspired the creation of tribunals for Rwanda and the former Yugoslavia, and cemented the principle that state crimes are imprescriptible. Yet it also revealed the limits of the law against memory. Many victims had died before hearing the sentence, and declassified documents decades later exposed the extent of official complicity. Justice arrived late, but it arrived. At Montluc, the executioner finally faced history, memory and legacy. Klaus Barbie's story does not begin in 1945 nor end in 1991. It spans the entire 20th century, linking the ruins of the Third Reich with the South American dictatorships, Cold War intelligence agencies, and Latin American drug trafficking. He was not an isolated monster, but an efficient component of systems that used, legitimized, and protected him. Barbie was valuable because he mastered torture, repression, and espionage. He learned these practices in Lyon, applied them in Bolivia, and perfected them during Operation Condor, where anti-communism became a moral cover for terror. The RatLines that carried him out of Europe were not acts of compassion, but political maneuvers. From the Vatican, prelates like Alois Hudal and Krunoslav Draganovic facilitated his escape under the guise of saving anti-communist souls. The Red Cross, overwhelmed by the humanitarian crisis, issued documents without oversight. The United States Counterintelligence Corps employed him because he spoke Russian and understood the Soviet apparatus. The Cold War turned former executioners into useful allies. Reinhard Gehlen, former Nazi intelligence chief, was recruited by the CIA and founded the BND. Walter Rauff, creator of the gas vans, worked for Pinochet. Otto Skorzeny, hero of Mussolini's rescue, operated in Spain as a link for neo-fascism. Barbie was part of this continuity. In Bolivia, he found a perfect refuge, a country with weak institutions, military governments, and an elite eager for European experts. The German community welcomed him, the MNR naturalized him, Barrientos hired him as an advisor, Banzer shielded him from extradition, and Garcia Meza integrated him into the repressive apparatus. He did not deceive everyone. He was accepted by those who knew his true identity. His counterinsurgency expertise made him a strategic asset. Álvaro de Castro recalled that Bolivian military officers knew his identity since the 1960s, but considered him indispensable. The methods Barbie applied in Latin America were the same as those of the Gestapo: sleep deprivation, electric shocks, mock executions. The Bolivian Interior Security Brigade, trained under his guidance, replicated techniques used in Lyon. Counterinsurgency manuals drafted with his advice combined anti-communism, espionage, and social control. Operation Condor reproduced the transnational logic of Nazi repression: cooperation among dictatorships, elimination of opponents, and the use of terror as a tool of order. Ideological boundaries blurred. Nazism became a doctrine of continental security. Beate and Serge Klarsfeld demonstrated that memory can also be a form of justice. For a decade, they tracked Barbie, facing threats, explosives, and the silence of complicit governments. Their work revived the memory of the Holocaust when Europe preferred to forget. They chained themselves in La Paz, published Le Dossier Barbie, and turned exposure into a public cause. Their persistence forced France and Bolivia to act. The 1987 trial was their moral victory and a universal lesson. Justice may be delayed, but it does not expire. The Lyon trial marked a turning point in international law. For the first time, a national court applied the principle that crimes against humanity are imprescriptible. Testimonies from Izieu and Montluc reconstructed a collective memory that the archives had tried to bury. Yet the trial also revealed the limits of the judicial system when faced with the magnitude of the horror. Many victims were already dead, and the institutions that had protected Barbie were never held accountable. The US CYC, the German BND, and the dictatorships that employed him remained untouched. Apologies arrived late and without consequences. Barbie's trajectory shows how the boundaries between state, intelligence, and organized crime blur. His arms routes became cocaine routes. His military contacts became drug trafficking partners. Planes that transported ammunition for dictators later carried cocaine to Panama and Miami. The men who protected him during the 1980 coup were the same ones working for Roberto Suarez and the Medellin cartel. Anti-communism justified everything: repression, corruption, and trafficking. In this context, Barbie was more than an advisor. He was a logistical operator of a narco-state. His victims were not limited to the deportees from Izieu or those tortured in Lyon. They also include the disappeared Bolivians, the murdered under Operation Condor, and the journalists executed for investigating his networks. His biography spans 3 continents and 4 decades of institutional violence. His death in 1991 closed his life, not the system that sustained him. The structures that protected him continue to operate under other names. Agencies that trade impunity for information, governments that sacrifice human rights for strategic convenience. Barbie's story is not an exception, but a warning. The memory of his victims depends on society keeping the question alive. How was it possible for a torturer to live unpunished for 40 years? The answer lies in complicity. Every passport issued, every diplomatic visa, every BND payment was a conscious decision. Klaus Barbie's story is also the story of the institutions that sheltered him and the men who ran them. Many died without accountability. Others continue to be respected names in official records. The Barbie case leaves a lesson that remains relevant. The past cannot be closed by decree. Victims demand memory. Institutions offer apologies and declassified files. Perpetrators die in prison or in silence. The structures recycle themselves. Barbie's death did not resolve this dilemma. It left it open, like a mirror forcing us to face the continuity between power, violence, and forgetfulness.